welcome to our last session with the sutras. We will have one session after this. That's a closure session, kind of a combination of practices and such. But in this one, we're going to look at the last sutras that we're going to cover in this course. So, of course, before we begin, we will do our invocation to the gurus. So, finding that spot for yourself that allows you to find a moment of peace through breath, through body. And on the exhale, we will invoke the Guru. Om Shri Guru Pyo Namaha. And lifting the gaze, opening the eyes. We start with a quote today. So we are venturing into the land of dhāraṇā, dhyāna, and all of them together on some level are a form of bhakti or devotion. So it is through these, dhāraṇā, dhyāna, and bhakti, the absolute abandonment of self or ego occurs. The sutras tell us. And they tell us it is then when we are led to Ishvara pranidhana and the connection known as Samādhi. It is when the state of union is attained, the state of yoga. And so meditation and contemplation are very powerful tools for coming to understand one's mind, but one's self, and attaining mastery over the modifications that happen within our citta, or our mind. And these core practices are, again, what attains yoga versus it being a thing. It's something that's attained. It's a state of being is yoga. So according to the sages, the mind stands between that unmanifest, transcendental reality and the manifest world. Now this varies in different yogic philosophies, but according to the sutras and how they are teaching this, that's what they say. And it is considered to be that which stands between body and soul in those teachings which are dualistic in nature. So that's another whole class, another whole story if we go beyond that. But just to know the difference between the dualism and non-dualism in general. So we go and we start with prātyāhara. So for me, prātyāhara to Samādhi, for me, is a spectrum. It's a spectrum in which we engage, at a spectrum of awareness, a spectrum of concentration. And you can go back and forth along the spectrum at any point, any time in your life. For some people, when they get closer to that state of Samādhi and invoking that, it's harder and harder to come back to a different reality. But it can happen. It does happen. I mean, you can see the great gurus like Sri Ravi Shankar or other people like that they can go into deep meditative states, but then still have the capacity to come back and speak with us and explain and try to teach and help us learn how we may also find that inner peace. So prātyāhara is that threshold to going inward, right? And it is when we withdraw the senses, we're going to do the practice today, from the objects and go beyond mind. That's what the Sanskrit translation tells us. Another translation breaks down the word as prāt, which is in the opposite direction, and ahara, which is ingested. So You could think of it, as I said, the threshold of going inward. So we'll do a little prātyāhara practice. I'm going to ask you to go ahead and, once again, find that comfortable seat. Hopefully you're still kind of there. It's not going to take too much to get there. And at first, without closing your eyes, I want you just to take in all the visual sensations around you. So the screen, any other visualizations, like I can see the trees outside my office, or anything like that, whatever it is that's around you. Just kind of noting them, not having to get too wrapped up in them. Other senses may pull you, sounds or things, just kind of notice that happening. But see if you can just go back to perusing without attachment the visuals. Just letting it be kind of a festival for the eyes. And now I'm going to invite you to lower your gaze or close your eyes completely. And as you do so, keep an awareness of where you are touching something else. So maybe it's your butt against the seat, or the back of your thighs against the chair, your back against the chair. Maybe your hands are resting on your thighs. Just kind of noticing the places in which touch is engaged. You could even emphasize them by very small muscle engagements, contracting those areas where there is contact. And then again going through and contracting those areas of contact, but then this time when you release, try to release the sensation of that space. Again, this is all just practice. Some may happen, some may not. Connecting and releasing at each point if possible. Now guide your awareness towards smells. So through several deep breaths, see if you can just take in the smells without even labeling them. Just allowing them to be a sensation in your awareness. And then again, through a series of several breaths, see if you can release and begin to shift towards taste and any taste that may be present in your mouth. Again, without attempting to name or distinguish what they are. And then from there, shifting finally your attention to sounds around you. Again, possible, notice without identifying as best you can. Once all the sounds have been engaged, without IDing them, if possible, invite them to draw your attention away, and then place yourself in a place that feels quiet, maybe within the middle of your chest or near your belly button or the space between your eyebrows. And see if you can just softly rest in a quiet awareness there. And if you find a sense or thought that draws you out, away from your center point, with kindness and as little judgment as possible of self, Being aware of that distraction, draw yourself back towards the soft awareness, the quiet within. This may take multiple times and years, decades of practice, but just be in this moment, doing it the best you can right now for just a few more minutes. And then begin to come back out, re-engaging one sense at a time as needed. Again, feeling yourself in your seat, tasting the tastes, smelling the smells, and finally seeing what you see. So this practice, prātyāhara, it's a practice of the awareness of what we ingest through our senses. Okay. So you'll kind of notice for yourself what you ingested through your senses in that practice. And instead of taking everything that comes our way, this practice encourages us to notice without filling up, without consuming. So can these things come to us without being all-consuming? Could the taste of that piece of pie be just enough? Could we not be consumed by having to eat the whole piece or the whole pie, for example? So if you've read the Bhagavad Gita, you will recognize this aspect of the outer and what are considered the lower sensory distractions, these senses, and how they are part of Arjuna's struggle in the Gita. And part of that struggle when he talks with Krishna, and it's the way in which Krishna seeks to help him comprehend these senses and tries to guide him to more deeply understand them and how they influence us. So the next sutra that we'll look at is now in the third pada. It's the third book of the sutras, or the third step. If you remember, the pada stood for foot, so the third step. And in this sutra alone, we look at dhāraṇā, dhyāna, and Samādhi. And these three, so dhāraṇā is translated as holding or bearing, I say bearing witness of sorts in a very light sense. It's the concentration of the citta, the mind, and on an object with fixed attention is how it's translated. Though that's not how I experience it, and I'll talk about that in a moment. But again, dhāraṇā is a technique of centering the mind and preparing yourself towards meditation, which is next. So when we do the practice, we could start with that sensory withdrawal when we're first starting to really help us get into a more concentrated state. So we can then move into dhāraṇā, the first one. And then once we've gotten into a concentrative state, which could be a decade of practice. I mean, for me, it was at least a decade of practice to work on my sensory withdrawal and concentration before I could even begin to feel like I had attained any kind of meditative state. And so you could see it again as that spectrum from withdrawing to concentrating to then that meditative state, or what is translated as the mind flowing in an unbroken current toward a particular object. Again, this is one form of yoga, thinks it's about toward a particular object. For me, I haven't found it to be that. I have found it more to be that it isn't a particular object, but it's more a form of absorption. So it's not Samādhi, which is like complete absorption, but just like, I don't even know how to describe it, but I don't find it as a particular object. So I just tell you that because I don't want you to think like I should find an object, right? My encouragement is just to let it unfold, see what comes of it as you practice through the sensory pieces. So contemplation gives the mind an opportunity to understand its job. So when we do these steps, it starts to train the mind on its jobs, right? And the job is simply to facilitate the exchange between the inner world and the external world, as us, kind of being aware of what's all happening and what the role of the mind is within all of that work. So we just are meant to simply watch, kind of register whatever it is that passes between these two realms, nothing more. Nothing more. And as time goes, that goal of yoga is not to control, restrain, or confine the experience or the mind, but it is to calm what are called the vṛttis, which are also in the sutras. We didn't talk about them. We'll talk when I do the advanced course, the deeper roots. We talk a little bit more about there. We also talk about them in the immersion and teacher training. But the vṛttis are the mind's roving tendencies. It's you know what I mean. When you're just like maybe driving down the road and all of a sudden you realize like, I don't even remember driving down the road because your brain has gone off to somewhere else. So that's the vṛttis. So the way in which this happens, these stages, can be done through so many different kind of techniques. That's why there's so many books and teachers and so forth that teach meditative practices and focusing practices and reflective practices. And it just takes time to figure out, which one is best for you, which one is most effective, I should say, which one allows you to go down the road of Raja Yoga or the meditative practice by combining all of these. And so when we look at these three, these three, dhāraṇā, dhyāna, and Samādhi, these are actually referred to as saṁyama in Sutra 3, 4, and 5. So the third chapter, 4 and 5 sutras. And that's, again, what I'm calling kind of the spectrum with prātyāhara at the beginning of it, in my mind. But in the saṁyama itself, it is these three particular ones. And as a practical matter, however, the body, mind, and consciousness are all intermingled. Again, when you live in a dualistic society or nation, or you've grown up in a dualistic system, you tend to see those as all separate. But ultimately, they are all one, and we never experience one in isolation from the other, if you will notice. That isn't usually the human experience, to notice just the body or the mind or the consciousness. We may only have our awareness on one, but they're all usually present on some level. And we may become preoccupied by the concerns of the body if we are more sensitive to it than the mind. So next time you find yourself preoccupied or focused in one of those areas, I encourage you to just sit back for a moment and go, what else is here? What else do I notice? And you will see those other ones. Therefore, these are all practices that are core to that unity, that attainment of yuj yoga. Okay? Attaining that mastery over the modifications of the minds is what some teachers say, which is, again, is secondary to dealing with the demands of the needs and the body in general, because that is what we live through in general, is through the body in the world, this modern world. And you can really see that once we drop away the body, how it is so much easier to go towards the mind. I'm thinking, again, I shared before, how when I worked in a hospice, and I would sit with people, they were dying, and how their concern for body, I'm not going to say everyone, but usually when it came close to time to leaving, there was so less concern here and so much more concern about something beyond this physical being. And this is why the practices assisting the physical level to be healthy help minimize the obstacles to attaining that mastery and understanding of the mind and the modifications that happen within the mind, or the vṛttis. Yeah. So asana, pranayama, dhāraṇā, these techniques and general principles of physical well-being, the yamas and niyamas, all of them are part of that path towards that attaining of unity. They all interweave. As you remember, sutras are threads, and the threads are all woven, and they create this beautiful fabric of attainment towards this state of yoga. And so a sincere approach to this ancient system retains ultimately that yoga, or yuj, is between the individual and that which is most divine to them, or that which represents Ishvara Pranidhana, as we have talked about. And the mind is just part of a tool. It's just an essential tool in that attainment, a tool that we come to know how to use skillfully, and find at times how to distance ourselves from, hopefully. So let me go when that distancing finally happens. So there's the saṁyama. Sorry, I forgot to put that up. Okay. We come to Samādhi. Okay. And so on the very bottom there you can see, as I've talked before, these are all part of that Raja Yoga path. Okay. And so Samādhi, the root of Samādhi is da, which it isn't written in here. It's part of it. It means to hold, and the prefix a plus sam means together completely. Okay, so Samādhi is a one-pointedness absorption, union, or a state of consciousness. Okay, and saṁyama are those combined practices, those 3 steps that work us towards that union, that Samādhi. So I know it's confusing. There's lots of different words. There's yoga, there's Samādhi, there's different ones, and each one has a gentle, tiny refinement to it in what it means. And this is the challenge of trying to understand ancient scripts. But if you can kind of, take the time to differentiate them for you. It took me many times, and I'm not going to tell you for me, but because I want you to find that for yourself. But Samādhi could sometimes be interchanged with the word yoga or yuj in that meaning, because they both mean that union and that attainment in different ways. So I wanted to share a little story about Einstein. And so I'm going to read it out of this book. So we can reflect on the story of the great Albert Einstein that we spoke about. So this author is referring to a previous sutra, when he experienced Samādhi on light. Oh, there's my kitty. She just came in the room. So first he contemplated dhāraṇā, or light. And with further awareness, he was led into meditation, dhyāna, on light. These stages followed each other sequentially and united in Samādhi. With seamless merging, the experience became saṁyama. So what she's trying to do, this author, is get you to see that he first contemplated dhāraṇā, or the light of dhāraṇā, and then as awareness went a little bit further into a meditative state, or what is known as dhyāna, yeah, and then that light, that inner light, that inner focus, eventually led into that union state of Samādhi, is what is written of Einstein, what he has said he practiced. And he says, Einstein humbly proclaimed, quote, "I did not discover light. I meditated on it until it revealed itself to me. Through saṁyama, consciousness is united. We are now able to realize the essence of yoga, citta, vṛtti, nirodha, Yoga is the uniting of consciousness in the heart. So saṁyama consciousness is when we are able to realize, so yeah, this is another way of framing it. Saṁyama consciousness is a way to realize the essence of yoga. So here we are, back where we started at Sutra 1.2. Yoga Chitti Varada Nirodha. So we come to understand that yoga is this process of attaining union. It's a harmonious state of mind. Yeah? And citta is that consciousness, the repository of the thoughts and the feelings. And as I mentioned, the vṛtti earlier, those turnings, those thought constructs are worked with, understood, not judged, observed, noticed, learned to work with. Yeah? And nirodha is that place in which there is discipline to the point of those vṛttis stilling. And the mind just naturally begins to not roam as much. I really can't emphasize enough, it isn't about a forcing of the mind to do anything. It's about letting go, actually. It's really about a letting go, in my mind. So different teachers will probably describe it in different ways. Different teachings will speak to you. But that's the way I guide those who work with me. It's more of a letting go. It's an awareness. And then as the awareness can be just dropped away a little bit, so there's basically nothing really left to go to, and then an absorption into that quietness of space. So we close this last talking session, this last giving you information and filling you up session, this last kind of scholarly session of the root of the lotus with our final mantra. Our next session, please come prepared to sit on the floor, meditate, absorb, work towards union, whatever it is you want to call it. We're going to kind of put all the practices together. So let's go ahead and close this last one, this mantra here. Taking a moment to withdraw into self. Maybe feeling the heart beating, the softness of the breath. And on the next exhale, we will close this practice of dhyāna yoga. So drawing the breath in. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Again, recognizing all the levels of peace and possibility. And then opening the eyes or lifting the gaze. Thanks for coming on this journey. I'll see you in our closure session.